When the empath feels hated for no reason, something ancient is unfolding beneath the surface of ordinary emotion. It is not hatred alone that moves through the air, but the recognition of likeness between two opposing poles of the same unconscious field. Whenever love appears in its purest and most sacrificial form, its shadow, resentment, envy, and fear rises at once to meet it. The narcissist, meeting the empath, beholds not a person, but a living mirror of the wound he has spent his entire life concealing. The empath, meanwhile, standing before the narcissist, experiences a sudden coldness, a strange hostility without cause. She cannot understand why her openness provokes attack, why her tenderness is read as weakness, why her compassion becomes a magnet for cruelty. Yet the psyche knows, whenever light enters a sealed chamber, the dust begins to dance. I have seen this pattern countless times in dreams, in analysis, in the myths of every culture. It is the eternal drama of the mirror archetype, where the one who gazes too deeply into another discovers his own unredeemed image staring back. The narcissist is terrified of this vision, for it threatens the fragile edifice of self-worship upon which his identity rests. The empath, on the other hand, is drawn by an unconscious vow to heal what she can feel but not see. Thus, they collide not as enemies, but as polarities in search of wholeness. One seeks to dominate to avoid dissolution. The other seeks to merge to avoid abandonment. Both are slaves to fear, and because fear is contagious, what begins as fascination soon becomes hatred. The hatred of the self, recognized in the other. Imagine a dream. You stand before a pool of water. Beneath the surface shimmers a figure that looks like you, yet not entirely. Its eyes accuse, its lips tremble with things unsaid. You reach to touch it, but the surface quivers and the image breaks into fragments. The narcissist lives forever at that broken surface. He cannot descend into the depths, for there he would lose control. He cannot turn away, for the image is his only proof that he exists. The empath, meanwhile, would dive headlong into the water to rescue the reflection itself. Both drown unless consciousness intervenes. To feel hated for no reason is to be confronted with the unconscious shadow of another. Hatred, when unjustified, is never personal. It is projection, an exorcism of what the other cannot bear to hold. The empath becomes the sacrificial vessel for this psychic poison, absorbing it, internalizing it, believing she must have done something wrong. This is the ancient role of the scapegoat, the pharmakos, the healer who carries the sickness of the tribe. But the modern empath forgets that the medicine is not martyrdom, it is awareness, until she sees that the hatred directed toward her is the hatred the other feels for himself. She will continue to mistake persecution for punishment and compassion for responsibility. You must understand that the narcissist's rage is born from an unbearable emptiness Behind his mask of superiority lies the child who once cried for recognition and met only indifference. His grandiosity is a defense against annihilation. When he meets an empath, he encounters, perhaps for the first time, a gaze that truly sees him, but to be truly seen is intolerable. It shatters the illusion of perfection. Therefore he attacks the mirror. He must destroy the witness to preserve the fiction of control. The empath, wounded and bewildered, withdraws, or worse, tries to love him harder, believing that understanding will calm the storm. Yet, love offered to an unintegrated psyche becomes fuel for its defense mechanisms. The more light she gives, the more violently the darkness asserts itself. In mythological terms, the empath and the narcissist enact the story of Eros and Narcissus inverted. Narcissus fell in love with his reflection and perished. The empath falls in love with Narcissus and nearly perishes too. She becomes echo, the voice that repeats another's longing until her own fades into silence. But in the Jungian sense, this myth is an initiation. Echo must rediscover her own voice. Narcissus must recognize that the reflection is himself. Only then can the polarity dissolve into integration. Whenever hatred arises without cause, ask not, why do they hate me, but what part of themselves are they seeing in me? This question transforms victimhood into vision. It awakens the archetype of the witness, that calm observer within who can hold both light and shadow without judgment. From that vantage, you realize that the hatred of the narcissist is a confession. It reveals what he cannot reconcile. Your sensitivity has touched a nerve in the collective unconscious, stirring the serpent that guards his treasure. The serpent's hiss is fear, its treasure is the lost soul. But the empath, too, must face her own shadow. For why does she remain where love becomes abuse? What secret guilt binds her to the cycle of giving without receiving? Beneath her compassion may lie a hidden pride, the belief that she can redeem what only life itself can redeem. This is the wounded healer archetype, Chiron, eternally tending others while his own wound festers. True empathy is not absorption, but resonance. It feels the other without losing the self. When empathy turns into fusion, it ceases to heal and begins to harm. The empath's journey, therefore, is not to close her heart, but to strengthen its boundaries, to learn that compassion without discernment is self-betrayal disguised as virtue. In the language of the psyche, every encounter is a symbolic exchange. The narcissist teaches the empath the necessity of separation. The empath teaches the narcissist the possibility of connection. They are mirror teachers, each carrying the medicine, the other refuses. When the empath finally withdraws her light, the narcissist is left alone with his reflection once more. Perhaps in that silence, he will at last see the face behind the mask. Perhaps the hatred will turn inward, not as self-destruction, but as remorse. Then, and only then, Can the process of individuation begin the moment you feel hated for no reason? Pause. Feel the energy, not the story. Behind the hostility is fear of annihilation, his and yours. Do not retaliate, do not explain, simply witness. The hatred will reveal its source like smoke. It rises from the burning of an illusion. When you refuse to feed it with your defensiveness, it dissipates. This is psychological alchemy, transforming poison into awareness, projection into reflection, hatred into insight. The one who hates you for no reason is unknowingly showing you the exact frequency of consciousness you have outgrown, and yet empathy must be accompanied by strength. The empath who awakens must cease trying to be loved by the one who cannot love. Her task is not to convince the narcissist of her worth, but to remember that worth exists regardless of perception. To walk away is not cruelty, it is the completion of a karmic equation. For when love no longer seeks validation, the mirror cracks, and both are free to face themselves at last. When we speak of projection, we are speaking of the oldest defense mechanism known to the psyche, the human being, unable to endure the sight of his own darkness, casts it outward onto another and then wages war upon it. This is not an act of evil, but of unconsciousness. In the same way that a man cannot see the back of his own head without a mirror, he cannot perceive his shadow without relationship. The empath, by nature of her openness, becomes that mirror. She does not intend to. Her mere presence evokes the unhealed parts of those around her. She does not accuse, yet her gentleness feels like accusation. She does not boast, yet her authenticity feels like exposure. The narcissist, who lives by the maintenance of his image, senses danger in such transparency. It is as though the light of truth were seeping through the cracks in his armor. His hatred, then, is not directed at the person before him, but at the unbearable feeling of being seen. It is vital to understand that hatred is a primitive form of self-preservation. The psyche believes it is protecting itself from disintegration. The narcissist, when confronted with the empath's silent truth, feels his inner scaffolding tremble. The grand narrative that sustains his sense of superiority begins to waver. He cannot admit fear. To do so would collapse his identity. Thus the psyche projects the fear outward and calls it contempt. She is weak, he says, but what he means is, she makes me feel weak. She is too sensitive, he says, but what he means is, she senses the truth I cannot bear. Hatred is the mask fear wears when love becomes dangerous. And the empath's poor soul interprets this hatred through the lens of her wound. She has known rejection before, perhaps in childhood, perhaps in the echo of a parent's disapproval or silence. The hostility awakens in her an ancient pattern. If I can love more purely, I will be safe. So she offers understanding, she offers forgiveness, she bends her boundaries until she becomes invisible. Yet, invisibility is the precise condition of the original wound. The more she tries to heal through giving, the more she reenacts the trauma of abandonment. She confuses compassion with atonement, but one cannot atone for another's blindness. Every empath must eventually learn that mercy without wisdom is merely self-erasure. The soul did not incarnate to be a sponge for collective pain. It came to transmute that pain into consciousness. To do so requires distance, solitude, and the courage to be misunderstood. The empath must cease striving to be the mirror that saves others, and instead become the flame that illumines her own depths. Only then can she offer true light rather than sacrificial fire. In alchemical terms, this is the stage of separation, when mercury and sulfur, spirit and matter are too tightly bound. The alchemist applies heat to distinguish them. The empath and narcissist enact this process psychologically. Their bond is initially magnetic, intoxicating, for they complete one another's unconscious story. But the same fire that attracts also purifies. The empath begins to see that her endless understanding does not heal but enables. The narcissist, faced with her withdrawal, experiences the first taste of emptiness. In that moment of loss lies his only doorway to transformation. Hatred cannot survive exposure to its own origin. Dreams often reveal this drama in symbolic form. I recall one patient who dreamt he was standing in a church of mirrors. Wherever he looked, his reflection smiled back. Yet the mirrors began to crack, and from each fissure oozed black ink. He awoke, terrified. What he was witnessing was the dissolution of persona, the outer mask of perfection shattering under the pressure of shadow integration. The empath's presence in life serves the same function as the cracking mirror in dreams. She brings forth the unconscious material the narcissist has repressed. This is why he both desires and despises her. She is the key to his healing and the threat to his illusion. The empath, meanwhile, dreams of drowning in other people's tears. She feels suffocated by emotions that are not her own. She wakes exhausted, confused, blaming herself for the very flood she did not create. But this dream, too, holds wisdom. It reveals that she has been swimming in the collective unconscious without anchoring to the shore of her own identity. Individuation demands that she reclaim her boundaries. She must learn the sacred art of containment, the ability to feel deeply without becoming the feeling itself. The world often romanticizes empathy as saintliness, but in its unrefined form, empathy is possession. To absorb another's pain without transmutation is to let their unconscious live through you. Jung once said that what we do not make conscious appears in our life as fate. The empath, who does not make her need for harmony conscious, will attract chaos until she learns that love cannot save those who refuse to awaken. Her compassion must evolve into clarity. She must learn that saying no is also an act of love. For It prevents the soul from being devoured by the endless hunger of another's void. And the narcissist's void is immense. It is the black hole of a self never mirrored in infancy, never affirmed in its authenticity. His identity was built not from being seen, but from performing what others needed him to be. Behind his arrogance lies despair. If I am not adored, do I exist at all? Every grand gesture, every manipulation, every cruelty is a desperate attempt to re-establish a sense of existence. The empath's love threatens to expose that this existence is artificial. Thus, the cycle continues. Seduction, devaluation, discard. It is not malice in the moral sense, it is the inertia of unhealed consciousness. To the empath, I say, the hatred you feel directed at you is not a verdict, but a mirror. Do not fight it, study it. Ask yourself, what in me believes I deserve this reflection? Every outer conflict corresponds to an inner one. Perhaps a part of you still believes that love must be earned through suffering, that being misunderstood is the price of goodness. These are the inherited myths of the wounded heart. You can break them only by recognizing that your worth precedes all approval. Hatred, when met with awareness, becomes revelation. It shows where love has been distorted into dependency, where compassion has been confused with control. When you feel hated for no reason, the soul invites you to step back into neutrality. Observe the psychic field. Do not become the emotion. Watch it like weather passing through the landscape of consciousness. In that stillness, you will see that the hatred is not yours. It is the echo of another's war with himself. By not reacting, you cease to be the battlefield. Remember, every projection seeks its home. When you refuse to host it, it returns to its sender. This is not punishment. It is balance. The narcissist, deprived of your energy, will be forced to confront his own emptiness. It is painful, but necessary. Without that confrontation, no, integration can occur. And for you, the empath, this withdrawal marks the beginning of individuation, the movement from identification with others to identification with the self, that divine nucleus of wholeness within. The hatred of others cannot touch this center. It may bruise the ego, but the self remains untouched, serene, observing. The task is not to eliminate sensitivity, but to root it in this inner ground where perception becomes insight instead of injury. When empathy is anchored in self-awareness, it ceases to absorb and begins to illuminate. You become a mirror of clarity, not confusion. A presence that reflects truth without distortion. In that state, hatred loses its sting. You see through it as one sees through a child's tantrum, an expression of fear, not malice. The narcissist, stripped of his power to provoke you, finds himself alone with his reflection. That is where his true journey begins. Whether he undertakes it or not is beyond your control. Your task was never to heal him, it was to recognize yourself. And so, When the empath feels hated for no reason, she must remember, this is not rejection, it is revelation. The universe is showing her the exact boundary where love must end and wisdom must begin. It is the initiation into sovereignty, the sacred alchemy by which compassion becomes consciousness. The mirror is not a passive object. It is a portal. When one gazes into it, the psyche begins to respond, reshaping the image according to the depth of one's perception. The empath and the narcissist are not merely participants in a psychological drama, they are, without realizing it, agents of alchemy, each serving as the other's mirror through which transformation becomes possible. But the danger of mirrors is that one may mistake the reflection for reality. The narcissist does this by falling in love with the image and rejecting its source. The empath does it by falling in love with the reflection of the other and forgetting her own face entirely. Both lose themselves in illusion. In the depths of the unconscious, mirrors represent the threshold between consciousness and the unknown. They are the symbol of self-knowledge, but also of self-deception. When hatred arises between two souls, it often means that the mirror has begun to reveal more than one side is willing to see. The narcissist looks into the empath and sees not her light, but his own hidden despair. The empath looks into the narcissist and sees not his cruelty, but the child she once was, the one who was never understood. Thus, each reacts not to the other, but to the phantom their psyche has conjured. They are trapped in a hall of mirrors, where every attempt to touch truth results in further distortion. The only way out is awareness. Awareness collapses the illusion when the empath realizes that she is not responsible for the emotions she reflects. The spell breaks. She steps back from the mirror, and suddenly the reflection loses its power. The narcissist may rage, accuse, or plead, for his existence depends on the gaze of another, but the empath no longer participates in the play. She has become lucid. Within the dream, this is the essence of individuation, to awaken within the psychic projection and recognize it as one's own creation. To feel hated for no reason is to stand at the edge of this awakening. It is the soul's way of saying, you have mirrored enough. Now it is time to see yourself directly. Hatred, though painful, serves as a catalyst for consciousness. It forces the empath to question, why does this wound me so deeply? What belief within me is being challenged? And in seeking those answers, she discovers that the true enemy was never the other, but her own identification with being the rescuer, the redeemer, the one who must always be good. Goodness is a fragile idol. It collapses under the weight of shadow. True wholeness includes both the saint and the sinner, the healer and the destroyer, the light and the dark. The empath's evolution demands that she accept this totality within herself. Only then can she cease attracting mirrors that demand she play only one role. When she owns her shadow, the narcissist loses his power to project his own upon her. What once appeared as hatred now reveals itself as energy raw, neutral, available for transformation. In my studies of alchemy, I found that the process of conjunctio, the sacred union, always begins with opposition. The masculine and the feminine, sulfur and mercury, the conscious and the unconscious, they must clash before they can merge. The heat of their conflict produces illumination. In the same way, the empath and the narcissist are drawn together to generate psychic fire. The empath brings compassion. The narcissist brings intensity. Their collision forces both to see themselves. If they remain unconscious, the fire consumes them. If they awaken, it refines them. But awakening is rarely gentle. It feels like death because something indeed must die, the false self that lived through others. For the empath, this means relinquishing the need to be needed. For the narcissist, it means facing the terror of emptiness. Both are painful initiations into authenticity. Yet behind every psychic death lies rebirth, the soul, stripped of its illusions, stands naked before God the Self, and from that encounter emerges renewed clarity. Let us imagine again the mirror. This time, the empath does not approach it seeking validation. She stands before it in silence. The reflection trembles, but no longer controls her. Behind her image, she sees the darkness and the light intertwined, each completing the other. She understands now that to be whole is to be paradoxical, gentle yet firm, open yet discerning, compassionate yet detached. The hatred she once feared now appears as energy she can observe without absorbing. She has learned the art of reflection without identification. This transformation does not mean indifference. True detachment is not the absence of feeling, but the presence of clarity. The awakened empath still feels deeply, but her feeling is no longer contaminated by unconscious guilt. She loves without needing to fix, helps without losing herself, and withdraws without resentment. This is not coldness, it is mastery. The ability to remain centered amidst projection is a mark of a soul that has integrated its shadow. In the mystical sense, hatred directed toward the empath becomes a form of initiation. Every attack, every misunderstanding, every betrayal becomes the hammer shaping the vessel of consciousness. The empath's sensitivity, once occurs, becomes her greatest strength, for in feeling everything, she learns the subtle languages of the soul. She can discern truth from falsehood, love from dependency, light from disguise. She becomes a seer, not through intellect, but through resonance, and she understands at last that hatred cannot touch what is real. It can only reveal what is false. The narcissist, however, may not reach this realization in this lifetime. His path is longer, for he must first dismantle the fortress he mistook for himself. Yet even his hatred serves a purpose. In attacking the empath, he unknowingly delivers the very lesson that will set her free, that she does not exist to be seen through another's eyes. The universe uses the narcissist as a sculptor, uses a chisel painfully, precisely to carve the empath's boundaries into being, and perhaps in some distant future, when the narcissist's illusions crumble and he faces his own reflection in solitude, he will remember the one who saw him truly and feel gratitude rather than rage. For even in his blindness, she mirrored the possibility of love without condition. When hatred surrounds you, do not rush to defend yourself. Do not fight to be understood. The moment you seek validation from blindness, you enter the same prison instead of breathe. Feel the energy move through you and return it to its source with forgiveness. Forgiveness, in the Jungian sense, is not moral absolution, but psychic liberation. It means releasing identification with the victim and returning the projection to the unconscious field. It means saying, "This is yours, not mine," and then walking away without bitterness. Hatred loses its purpose when it meets consciousness. The empath who has awakened becomes untouchable, not because she hides, but because she vibrates at the frequency of truth. The shadow can bark, but not bite. The light no longer provokes it, it reveals it. This is the secret of the alchemical marriage. When light ceases to resist darkness, darkness transforms into depth. And so, when the empath feels hated for no reason, she is witnessing the moment before dawn. The psyche is shedding its illusions. The mirror is clearing. The self is about to emerge. It is painful because birth always is, but from that pain arises sovereignty. The knowing that love is not something you earn through suffering, but something you are by nature. The hatred was never a punishment. It was the initiation into remembrance. When the soul has crossed the threshold of illusion, the battle between light and shadow loses its ferocity. What remains is a deep stillness, a kind of sacred neutrality. This is not apathy, it is wisdom born of suffering. The empath, who once absorbed the storms of others, now stands at the center of her own inner temple, where silence is not emptiness but fullness. She has seen what hatred really is. The cry of a wounded god in exile. The narcissist, the persecutor, the one who projected poison upon her, was merely an emissary of the unconscious, sent to awaken her remembrance of boundaries and self-worth. Every wound was an initiation, every betrayal a revelation. When hatred becomes a teacher, suffering transforms into insight. The empath begins to perceive the subtle architecture of relationships, not as accidents of personality, but as precise configurations of archetypes dancing in time. She recognizes herself as the anima mundi, the world soul that feels the pulse of humanity within her own nerves. Yet she no longer confuses this sensitivity with obligation. To feel deeply does not mean to carry endlessly. She learns the divine paradox. The one who feels all is called not to save the world, but to witness it into wholeness. In this awareness, the empath encounters the self, the archetype of totality, the divine image within The self is not sentimental. It does not seek comfort. It seeks completion. It uses both love and hatred, gain and loss, to sculpt consciousness into form. When the empath aligns with the center, her empathy becomes luminous rather than draining. She sees that every encounter, no matter how cruel, serves individuation. The narcissist's hatred, therefore, was a necessary shadow in her awakening. Without it, she might never have turned inward to find the eternal ground beneath her emotions, to the unawakened mind. This sounds cruel. How could pain be divine? Yet the psyche operates according to the logic of symbols, not sentiment. The crucifixion precedes resurrection. The descent into Hades precedes rebirth. The empath's crucifixion was to be loved and then despised without cause. Her resurrection is to love without attachment, to understand without absorbing, to bless without bending. This is the Christ pattern, the eternal symbol of the soul that transforms poison into wine. When the empath ceases to identify with either victim or savior, she becomes the third thing, the observer, the alchemist, the conscious presence through which opposites reconcile. In this space, hatred becomes energy, energy becomes awareness, and awareness becomes love again, but this time a love that is impersonal, cosmic, and incorruptible. It does not depend on approval. It does not fear rejection. It simply is. The narcissist, if he ever awakens, must traverse the same landscape from the opposite direction. His path begins with pride and ends with humility. When the mirror of adoration shatters and he faces his own emptiness, he too stands at the gate of the self. Some turn away, unable to bear the sight. Others, by grace, remain. They descend into the abyss they once denied, and there discover the forgotten child, the true self. Small, trembling, radiant. From that moment, hatred dissolves into grief, and grief becomes the doorway to compassion. But you, the empath, cannot control when or whether this happens. Your liberation lies not in their repentance, but in your release. Every time you detach from the illusion of being the healer of others, you heal yourself. Every time you withdraw from toxic mirrors, you polish the mirror of your own consciousness. In doing so, you contribute silently to the healing of the collective, for the unconscious of one is bound to the unconscious of all. This is the mystical dimension of individuation, the realization that personal transformation ripples through the fabric of humanity. When you stop absorbing hatred, you stop perpetuating it. When you stand in awareness, you become a field of coherence in a world addicted to projection. Hatred cannot survive in the presence of such coherence. It dissolves like shadow before dawn. In this stillness, the empath perceives something even deeper. Beneath the noise of love and hate, beneath all psychological drama, there exists a vast intelligence, the self of the world. It orchestrates every encounter with exquisite precision, weaving together souls, not to destroy them, but to awaken them. The narcissist and the empath are not mistakes of creation. They are instruments in the great symphony of integration. Through their meeting, humanity learns to reconcile compassion with power, love with discernment, reflection with selfhood. When you realize this, forgiveness arises naturally, not as a moral act, but as a recognition of truth. You see that there was never truly an enemy-only consciousness playing both sides of its own evolution. The hatred that once pierced your heart becomes a kind of music, a low hum of transformation echoing through time. You feel gratitude, not for the pain itself, but for what it revealed, the indestructible presence of your own soul. And perhaps one evening, in the quiet of your solitude, you will feel that same energy returning not as hatred, but as peace. The one who once despised you may appear in memory softer now, almost human, stripped of their mythic proportions. You no longer need them to understand. The lesson is complete. The mirror has served its purpose. You have seen yourself. From here, life becomes simple again. You walk among others without fear of their projections. You sense their pain, but no longer carry it. You love without agenda, speak without calculation, rest without guilt. You understand that to exist is to reflect God in a unique way, and that not everyone can bear that light immediately. But light does not apologize for shining. It illuminates because it must. When the empath feels hated for no reason, it is because the world has momentarily forgotten its own divinity. Your task is not to prove your innocence, but to remember it. The hatred of the unconscious cannot define you. It can only reveal where consciousness is needed. And each time you remain in awareness, you redeem a fragment of humanity. This is the final reconciliation, the mystical marriage of opposites that Jung described as the union of the ego and the self. It is the end of projection, the beginning of presence. The empath who once wept now smiles in silence, not because she has won, but because she understands. The narcissist who once raged may one day find that same silence within himself. And in that silence, he will remember her not as a victim, not as a mirror, but as the spark that began his own awakening. Thus, hatred fulfills its hidden purpose. It brings to light what love alone could not reveal. The empath's pain becomes the womb of wisdom. Out of the ashes of misunderstanding rises the phoenix of self-knowledge. And when that bird takes flight, it carries with it a song that the world has long forgotten, the song of unity, of compassion beyond polarity, of love that sees through illusion. The mirror has closed, the reflection has dissolved. What remains is consciousness itself, vast, unbroken, eternal. You are that. You always were. And now, when someone looks at you with inexplicable hatred, you will no longer ask, why me? You will smile gently and think, they have met their reflection, and you will bless them silently for, the pain of awakening. Then you will turn inward once more to the quiet center where all opposites meet and whisper the truth that ends every war. I am whole. And